Hello, everybody. All of my weed freaks, potheads, kind of curious people, thank you for turning on this podcast. As you hopefully know, this is the podcast where we talk about what it's like to be high, and sometimes we talk about some other things. So yet again, we are here with a new interview subject. Today we have Jaime. Jaime, I think she has some history with cannabis, but also in addition to that, which obviously we're going to talk about her history, and what it's like, but she also is the co-founder of a recreational cannabis startup. So Jaime, please tell the folks about who you are and a bit more about this cannabis startup.
Sure. So I have been working on all sorts of community engagement for years. And because of that, I was invited to join Perception Farms, which has applied for several dispensary licenses and a craft grow license in the state of Illinois. And we are very equity based, which the state's requirements are that, but we are really sharing equity with all of the employees as part of our business model, as opposed to just hiring one person that will then receive a minimum of 51% of the equity of each license. So really a co-op model and trying to distribute wealth throughout communities in the Chicago area.
That's really awesome. Can you actually go a little bit more in depth? Because I'm sure a lot of people don't fully know, all what's involved in the equity that Illinois has put forth in terms of the cannabis legalization that they did at the beginning of, I think it was the beginning of this year, 2020. And I can't even remember all the details myself. Obviously, you don't need to go through every single little thing, but can you give us just a little bit more information on what that is, and then, what that specifically means for your employees?
Yeah, so in Illinois, really the folks who have been carrying the burden of illegal cannabis throughout most of our history have been primarily people of color. And Illinois really wanted to make sure that as they embraced legalization, that those people who had been would be considered most underrepresented in the field of cannabis and in the legal cannabis recreation market, that they have an opportunity for ownership because they have been the most impacted by the war on cannabis. And so it was really interesting how Illinois set up all of its laws and its systems and its application for the first round, none of which is perfect, and there's a lot of lawsuits happening around that right now. But really, they wanted, the lawmakers and the people that wrote the bill really wanted to ensure that there wasn't more perpetuation of white males owning and running all of the cannabis companies in Illinois, but really trying to support community members, but especially people of color in Illinois as license holders. Women aren't represented very much either in that space, and so I'm a little bit unique in that way, but still a white person. And so we really met up and did a lot of interviewing and engaging with people who were what the state would identify as a social equity applicant, so that they lived in a region of the state that was most impacted by the war on cannabis, or they had a minor drug related offense on their record that would actually be deleted by the new legalization of cannabis in Illinois.
And I think those were like nonviolent, and it was under a certain amount and that
Correct.
sort of thing.
But even with that, there might have just been a ticket. In the last few years, Cook County, at least in Chicago, has been pretty light on that. But in terms of what your reprimand was, if you were caught with cannabis and you weren't supposed to have it before it was legal. But before that, the situation could have been pretty grim. You could have gone to jail. You could have really lost part of your life and had a permanent record against you by having what is not really a big amount of cannabis on you. So the way the law was structured, they were really trying to make amends and reparations for those community members.
Yeah, I mean, as much as they possibly can. Yeah, lives have been just absolutely ruined
Mm-hmm.
by just tiny amounts of cannabis arrests and go to jail forever. And yeah, it really has screwed things up. I went to one of the town hall meetings about this new legalization
Mm-hmm.
before it went through in my town, and I I had no idea at that time what they had been planning. I knew that they had been working on it. They had been talking to people at in Colorado and Washington. I had no idea that the amount of research that they had done. And then when they got into this whole equity thing, um, I was blown away because they said this is the main goal of why we are doing this, and we want these laws, this new law, to be the gold standard for other states to work from. Because when Colorado did it, it was sort of a free for all, to
Yes.
put it lightly. Like you said, it may not be perfect, but it's definitely the best thing that was out there at the time. So it's really great. I was so relieved to hear that this was a big part of what they were doing. So what does that look like for your employees?
Mm-hmm.
What do they get from that?
Yeah, so every license that we applied for, we had a separate set of applicants, social equity applicants on that license with us, and they will all have equity in the company, as will and will be tested on legally on this model as we move forward if we're successful in securing a license in Illinois. But really ensuring that all new employees, in addition to those founding applicants who are on the license, that they also have equity in the company. So I think I said earlier, it's almost like a co-op model where everybody who's working for, whether it's our umbrella company or the individual license holders, so the individual dispensaries or the individual craft grow locations, everybody will have ownership. And of course, that's us, giving up, some of our control and our equity as well, but it's only going to make everything that much stronger because of that commitment and interest in each of those individual employee owners in the company's success. It's not just a job. It's also it's a company that you own stock in, and that has value, and it's really different than just hiring someone.
Absolutely. I mean, when an employee is in that situation, they have much more. They have much more higher vested interest
Mm-hmm.
in doing a good job and making sure that the company succeeds. And you hear stories all the time about when the owners of the company actually treat their employees fairly and make them happy, and give them what they deserve. The company actually does better, and everybody's happy, which really is the ultimate goal. So yeah, that's awesome to hear that obviously that Illinois has done this, but that you are jumping on this and obviously doing what you can to help, and also just to help this industry, which is I think it's a really important industry. Anybody who's heard this podcast knows kind of how I feel about that. Because it's medicine both physically and mentally, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like. So unless there's anything else specific that you want to talk about that, we can get into the actual interview portion.
Sure, let's go.
Cool. So please tell me the first time that you tried pot, if you can remember, and if it was not the first time that got you high, please tell me that story as well.
So yes, I was in high school and was probably 17 the first time that I smoked, and I did not get high. It was did not affect me the first time. So the second time, I was with friends, and it definitely was, and we'll continue to talk about this, I think, over the course of the interview. A new sensation and really interesting to me that I wanted to continue to do it. And so I did, I was a semi regular user, I would say, until I was about 21 or 22. And then I took quite a hiatus after that. But while I was in the zone at the beginning, I really appreciated the mental stimulation, the physical stimulation of being high.
And so these first couple of times, you said that you were with friends. Was there anything specifically interesting about the situation, or was it like how did you get it? Was it the first time for all of you? What were some of the details about those first times?
Yeah, so the first time that wasn't effective in getting me high, it was many of our first times. It was a small group of people. I think there were three of us. And after that, often we would, as we were both in high school and obviously it wasn't legal, we would smoke outside. And I remember that at the beginning it was always cold, so there must have been in the winter that I first tried it, and then we would go inside and just hang out for the most part, and often watching something and lots of giggling, lots of munchies, all those stereotypical things that I actually don't experience now,
Mm.
but I did back then. Yeah, and I know all of it depends on what kind of cannabis that you're taking in, which triggers what the other reactions are going to be. But lots of giggling, lots of eating.
And do you remember any of the things that you watched?
Ooh, oh, I can think about whose house we were in and who was with me. There was quite a stretch where there were just three of us. Smoking together and then hanging out. I don't. I don't. Although throughout the like my first few years of smoking before I went on hiatus, I know that there was a lot of David Lynch movie watching in
Mm.
that, and not so much giggling accompanied with that, but definitely mentally stimulating for the high that I was having.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody's familiar with David Lynch stuff, that's definitely mentally stimulating in just a normal state of mind.
Hmm.
So you mentioned that this was a new feeling, something that you wanted to continue with, which you obviously did for a little while. What was it? Can you put into words what it was about this new feeling? Why was it different? How did you feel different?
Yeah, so I think, and I do experience that now as well. There's a just a sense of relaxation and a slight buzz and awareness of a lot of sensory details and the experience going on around me that I might not take in otherwise. So there is definitely a lot of physicality to it where my body felt I guess buzzed as well as my mind, and really being able to I guess I just was very and continue to be very aware of all sorts of sensual pieces of life that can be overlooked sometimes.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into some of the details with like sort of all those types of things in terms of focus and the physicality and the relaxation. In general, if there's ever a story that jumps out at you that you think of, feel free to just tell it because this stories just help so much. So just on that note, is there a specific story from your past that jumps out at you whenever you think about getting high that you just go to that one right away?
So I would actually say, in reflection, more recently, I was on a trip where I was doing a lot of hiking, and the my friend that I was with kind of unexpectedly gave me a mint when we were going to watch the sunset. And we were out looking over Lake Michigan and literally just were sitting there watching the sunset slowly. It's something that he and I have done together multiple times now where we're just really appreciating the and taking in the light fading from the sky. And when we sat down, the the sun was pretty high, but the we were sitting, yeah, on Lake Michigan, and one of the places that's rated almost one of the best places to watch a sunset in the country. And
Mm,
it was just so amazing to sit and be high, not outrageously high, but high, and hear the waves, see the light sparkle, feel the breeze, watch the sun slowly set, and feel like you were really able to capture that whole experience. And we were together and certainly interacting a little bit, but both of us were having our own individual experiences
hmm.
watching that sunset.
And so what and then this is sort of the thing that I think about all the time, and I ask people this about various types of things. What was it about the sunset? What was different? What was the thought process like of why was the sunset different? Why was it so enjoyable? Were there specific thoughts that you can think of that you can remember at this point?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I mentioned already of like the sensory experience, and how I really like that part of being high, where everything just seems heightened. And really, it's probably, it's not that it's any different from reality, like that those
Right.
experiences could be had on their own. But you're slowing down enough to be like totally present and appreciative and take it all in. And so, yeah, like just the slowing down, I think, is a big piece of that. In addition to that, there are, some things going on chemically in the brain, while you're high as well, that support that. But just, I mean, I can recall really being into the slow sound of the lapping waves, the light sparkling off the water, the color of the sun set itself wasn't even super extraordinary, but
Hmm.
having being slow and having that full experience was what made it so spectacular.
It's such a wonderful thing. I mean, sunsets, sunrises are just beautiful in general. And then when you add that, it takes it obviously to another level. And I think I ask these questions. I guess part of it is why I'm doing this in general is because I sort of want to get into people's heads. I want to know what their thought process is like, what's going on in their head, because it's which is not possible. We can't understand what somebody else's experience is like. So I guess this is just my way of getting into people's heads just a little bit more, just to sort of see what their experience is like, since it's different than mine.
Yeah, and
But
absolutely. I mean, I think we know that, like with any stimulant, we all are truly having different experiences. And you have talked about that in just about all of this podcast series from the beginning, when it was more of cuts of individual interviews on one specific topic to now. It is fascinating to understand what any of our experiences are that are different with the same thing, because of course our individual chemistry and our brain chemistry is so unique.
it is, and it's, yeah. I just find that so fascinating. So
Hmm.
it's always good that when people can agree and validate my opinions. Um, So you talked about it being slower. So let's talk about time. There's not maybe a whole lot to say. You've already mentioned that it feels slower. Is that pretty common for you, that when you get high, that everything sort of just feels slower?
Yeah, and especially the more high I am, everything kind of visually seems like it's going in slow motion.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm pretty selective about when I use cannabis these days, and what type of cannabis or how I'm intaking the cannabis, whether it's an edible or smoking, based on what I'm looking for out of it. I certainly don't expect to be all that productive when I'm in that slow space, but I'll give an example. This summer, my grandmother died of COVID, and when someone's in the hospital with COVID and who's old, who has breathing problems already, I mean, it just doesn't seem really like an optimistic situation that they're going to leave the hospital in reality. And it was pretty terrible, going through that experience of her being in the hospital, just knowing that that was likely going to be the end result. And the day that she did die, I was like, oh, I need this. I need the slowdown. I
Mm.
need the relaxation, but I also just need that sense of peace that cannabis can afford. I think I used edibles that day, but yeah, it was absolutely the best way for me to cope at that moment.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the loss of anybody in your life is hard, but especially during this year, that's something that a lot of people have been experiencing, which none of us should be experiencing that at all. But that just, I think, adds another layer. So I'm sorry, obviously, for your loss. And how did it help you that day? What I don't know how did it help you?
Yeah, so I would say in general, I'm going to go to a super generalization of acquaintances or friends that have been using more since the pandemic started. But, I think in Illinois, we've been so lucky that recreational cannabis became legal. I know that you can have a medical card, and that's a whole feat in itself to get that card. But for the rest of us who just never really thought that that was the path to go down for whatever reason, to have cannabis be legally purchasable right before the pandemic started, I feel like is such a crazy gift that I don't think any of us would have anticipated. I know so many people who are using it for anxiety and um, even low level depression treatment right now, or that's the only way they're getting to sleep. It's fascinating the role that recreational cannabis is playing in Illinois right now because of the pandemic. But for me that day, I had been so caught up in so many emotions for, I think she was in the hospital for 10 days before she
Hmm.
died. And it was a roller coaster up and down. And, even I actually have never really felt that way before, where there were days that I was like, oh, I need to eat. Like, I need to be eating. And I didn't expect this whole experience to be like that. But when she did pass, which, as I said, I felt was inevitable, it was just like, okay, I need to let all that roller coaster of emotions just kind of be right now and just be present and reconnect with myself.
Mm. Did it allow you to sort of get into your emotions a little bit more? Did it, or did it even do the opposite? I guess in some way, sometimes numbing the emotions, it can be maybe a beneficial way, at least temporarily, in that process.
Yeah, I would say it's actually more of the latter, where I needed to turn it off
Right.
because it had been so up and down and so emotional the previous 10 days. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this. Like for like the next 4 or 5 hours, this is okay. I'm going to get back to everything else, and I'm going to have all of my feelings and reactions, but I'm going to do this. And I think I might have binged watched Parks and Rec at the same time. So really I was turning it off and just trying to reconnect with some joy in a sad time.
Sure. Yeah, obviously we all need that when we're going through a situation like that. As maybe hard as it is to admit, I think we do need that at times. When you're in the thick of it, you need sometimes some light. We had actually been talking about time a little bit, and you said it sort of slows everything down. I had another question about that specifically. So it's what do you think? Why do you think everything is slowed down for you?
You know, so interestingly, as part of our dispensary application, I had to take a dispensary agent training. It's a requirement
Mm,
for anybody who is going to work in or be able to sell cannabis. And I learned a lot in a good way. I am not on the scientific end of cannabis use before I really was in the applying for the recreational licenses with my co-founders, and it was so interesting to understand. So the training and the test is really focused on individuals' reactions and some of the chemistry, and especially around indica and sativas. And I think I'm intrigued because I know that there's so much that's going on that we don't have enough research around because cannabis has been illegal for so long now. That I would love to know more around what is chemically happening to each person's brain or just the user's brain in general. Like what parts of the brain are being stimulated and lighting up when you're high, or which parts are kind of slowed down. Because I think that probably all really affects what's happening,
hmm
aside from perception. But you know what? I think you need to ask me that question again. Why do I think it slows down?
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
I guess the more specifically is sort of what's going on in your brain
hmm
that makes things feel or seem like they're slower.
Yeah, I think with cannabis, similar to alcohol, sometimes, there's a little bit of a fuzziness that's going on for me when I'm intoxicated, and that's probably something of what's happening. It's almost like it's gauzier, and maybe the the connections of like neurons firing and the synapses in my brain are just go moving a little bit at a slower rate than they normally would be, and that's kind of what it feels like. So that
Mm,
it's the thinking as well as the bodily reactions are also slowed down.
yeah, and what a gift, especially for a sunset, to actually enjoy it in a much slower way, because that's something that you feel like, oh, when it's over, oh, I wish I had enjoyed it more, or I wish it would have lasted longer. But then when you can actually do that, and it's I think a lot more about being in the moment. That's a gift, I think.
I
Um,
agree.
Yeah. So sort of to backtrack a little bit, you had mentioned that sometimes you smoke, sometimes you take edibles. Are there other methods that you use, or is it really just those two?
Just those two. Yeah.
Yeah. And then do you prefer one over the other? Is there a reason why you choose one over the other?
Um, to be honest, I mean, I really, really enjoy smoking. It's like so old school of when I started using it.
Mm,
I've always liked that sensation, and the feeling is different. I feel like the high is different,
mm,
as well as how quickly you're feeling, the impact of being high, as opposed to more delayed with the edibles. So that's my preference is smoking. However, I also understand that there's a real impact on your lungs and your lung health, just like smoking anything else has. And
mm-hmm.
especially right now, it's been fascinating to just hear how many people are really trying to move to edibles because of concern of coronavirus and their lungs. So people are like, okay, we're just going to go with edibles. And I'm more and more like, maybe I'm being influenced by their thinking, but I really like smoking better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, there's that immediate impact. I mean, I guess vapes probably they would give that as well, but a lot of people have said it's just a different feeling. And I do think it is so funny because you are not the first person to say that you enjoy the act of smoking, and logically that makes no sense to me, and I think it's hilarious. But you know, obviously, people like it, and even though I may not necessarily have that nostalgia or that feeling of
hmm
I like this, clearly like that brings back a lot of people have mentioned it's old school. That's the way it was, and there really was no other option. So that's
Mm-hmm.
that. But then also people have said like I like the burn in the back of my throat,
Mm-hmm.
which I think
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's so anti-logical it doesn't
Yes.
make
Yeah.
any sense,
Absolutely.
but it's so great that there are multiple people who just feel that way, and that's cool, fine.
Especially because edibles, I mean, they're not also like homemade edibles if you're buying them on the legal market. And not that there's anything wrong with homemade edibles, but I they're so good, like taste wise,
Oh
they're
yeah,
so good. And so to prefer the smoking is interesting because you can have such different additional sensory experiences and super tasty ones by taking in edibles. And vapes, I do not like. I've only tried a few times, and actually, the last I purchased a cartridge once, and then that made me have to go, buy a whole bunch of accompanying parts, and I ended up giving it to my ex-husband because it was like I am not into this at all. Like, here,
yeah.
take this.
It sort of takes it to another level.
I didn't like the taste.
Mm,
Yeah. Mm.
not for you. Um, and then how often do you either smoke or have an edible? I think you mentioned you're pretty particular on when you actually do it. How often is that?
Um, I would say it kind of depends on, well, for sure it depends on whether my child is with me or not.
Yeah,
Which is true also for my drinking. If I have a glass of wine, that'll be it. But sometimes, when I would say, especially in the last probably 6 or 7 months, when my brain isn't able to shut off, I will use it before bedtime just to help me sleep and fall asleep. Um, I'm trying to think of like, okay, but that's not answering your actual question of how often.
that's okay. It's all good
Maybe,
stuff.
yeah, maybe on average twice a week.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll say on average. And sometimes I feel like it's like, oh man, like my brain will not calm down right now. And so it might be every night I take one hit or
Sure.
one like low dosage of a gummy just to get me to go to sleep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, and you said the last 6 or 7 months. Yeah, that's the time that we've all
Hmm.
been struggling. So that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Um, and then on average twice a week.
Hmm.
And then other than your child not being there, other than needing to shut off your brain or needing to sleep, is there something else that is the reason why you would choose to do it?
Usually I want to have enough time to be able to enjoy it.
Sure.
Obviously, those times I'm going or taking it before bed, like are like it's not like a full experience. I like I said, I like the sensation. I love the experience of being high, and so it's often just having enough of a window of time when I'm like, yes, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, mhm.
Yeah, and obviously we're all pretty busy, so that you may not have a lot of time to enjoy it. So they're like, "Oh, well, there goes that day. Let's try tomorrow."
Yep, yep, yep. And
Yeah,
I don't take in that much at any one time, so it's probably not what most people experience. Like I'm not getting like baked. I'm just getting buzzed for the most part, unless I'm taking a little bit of a higher dosage of edibles.
hmm. And then what is your sort of average edible amount milligrams wise?
Well, also my dispensary agent training made me realize that just like alcohol, that cannabis, you just start having a tolerance for it, and
Hmm.
obviously there's some relation with your weight and your how often you take in any amount of cannabis, and so I. For a while, I would say, like honestly, 2 milligrams was like, okay, this is fine, and it is not the case. Last night I had or anymore. Last night I had a 5 milligram mint, and I was like, I don't know if I just have a really full stomach or if my tolerance is getting better, but I really didn't feel much of anything. And most people would laugh at that dosage anyway, because people were like, what? I take 20
Right.
milligrams when I'm trying to get stoned. Um, but my tolerance for everything, alcohol included, is always pretty low. And so I'm like, oh, okay, well, now I know. Because this weekend I actually have some relaxing time as well as the next weekend, and so I have plans to get stoned, and I am gonna need to up
Uh,
whatever level I'm gonna take.
yeah, definitely, start on that lower end. You don't want to overdo it right
Yeah,
away unless you totally want to
yeah,
overdo it, which is fine. You're not going to die. You're going to probably pass out, worst case.
yeah.
So okay, yeah. So 5 milligrams sounds like it's on the lower side for you at this point.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, tolerance. There are people who literally will take a full month off. They call it a tea break or a tolerance break.
Mm,
Even I think just 1 or 2 days in
hmm.
between really will have a major effect on your tolerance. Yeah. And then so this is one of my favorite questions because there's never a good answer for it. But has anybody? Well, actually, before I ask this question, do you typically get high alone or with a person or with other people? And obviously, the last like 7 months are kind of an exception.
Yeah, so I actually didn't get into this at all, but this is a good time to bring it up. So, as I said, there was probably about 4 or 5 years that I was semi-regularly, although I had very little income to put towards buying cannabis. But I was, from the time I was like 17 to 22, a user. And then I stopped, and I don't even remember why I stopped. But I didn't consume at all for probably about 2 years, and then I tried it again, and I was like, wow, yeah, I do not like this at all.
Mm,
And so and now I realize that it was probably the strain that I had, like that it was probably something very specific about what I was smoking that day, but I had no idea. Like, actually, that light bulb went off earlier this year. And I was like, oh, that's probably what happened. It
mm,
probably wasn't actually that I didn't like it, or if it was like way out of my previous experiences, it might have been an indica instead of sativa. I don't know. But like,
hmm
it was most likely that. I always used to do it as a group. That was all, it was social. It was, I don't think I ever, when I was younger, smoked alone. It was, the equivalent of drinking and going out to a bar. You're just going to a friend's house and hanging out. Now it's almost exclusively solo, but again, my uptake really increased this year, which is, yeah, during the pandemic. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's a little hard to pull that out. Um, and I also realized, like when I was with my friend and what we watched the sunset together, because I wasn't in the practice of talking anymore while I was high, I was like,
Mm.
wow, I'm really quiet. Like, oh, yeah, I'm just used to going so into my head
Right.
now, that I like, oh, I'll have to work on that at some point, whenever we see the end of this.
Right, right. Yeah, it was you're used to just thinking a lot when you're alone because that's what you've been doing. And then when you're when you get into that state and there's another person there, that you start thinking and you feel like you're being antisocial. So he was also just quiet as well, or was he talking and you were ignoring him?
Oh, he was actually quiet as well. We both really, really enjoy being in nature, and
Mm,
so it was this a great opportunity to just, yeah, watch the sunset, and enjoy all that we were seeing and hearing and feeling in that moment. And it was really nice actually that we didn't feel compelled to, either one of us, to chat away.
right. And then has he ever said, or in your past, when it was more social, has anybody actually told you what you were like when you were high?
Hmm. So we didn't talk about that, he and I, after that experience, but um, huh, I might not want to go there.
That's totally
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah,
No
yeah,
worries.
yeah.
I'm here to get some level of view into your life, but I
Yes,
don't need all of it.
yes,
There's privacy. Yeah.
yes.
So let's see. So, this is typically a very early question. We've already talked a lot about stuff, but when you first take a hit when you're smoking or when that edible starts to kick in, what are some of the things that you start to feel?
Warmth, like physical, internal warmth, is probably one of my first indicators that I'm getting high, that I will just feel, yeah, internally, like warmth is spreading through me. And it's subtle, so I have to be paying attention. It's not like overwhelming of an
Right.
experience. Um, that's usually the first thing that I'll feel to know that I'm high, and then the the mental feelings are following that. But it's physical for me first, which is always interesting because then I'll be like, oh, does my brain know this is happening yet? Um, but yeah, so it's definitely something I can feel physically before I'm aware of mentally.
And it's so funny that you say, is my brain aware of this when, in general, and it's not 100% true, but in general, those physical feelings probably are stemming from the brain in the first place
Of
anyway.
course, yes.
Right. And then, but your brain isn't necessarily conscious of
Mhm.
what is happening. That's so that you feel it first. And I think that that's probably fairly typical, although not necessarily. And then, this is another one of those things that you may not know unless you're actually paying very close attention. But when the brain does start to catch up and you do start to have those thoughts, what are some of those thoughts? Do you have any specific memories of what that is?
Yeah, and I know that the more specific, the better, but I'll at least probably the sensations first are relaxed and happy, I guess. It's rare that I don't feel good when I'm high. I guess I
Hmm.
probably wouldn't continue to be high,
Right.
or continue to get high if I didn't feel good. Um, finding things funnier, especially when you're in a house or an apartment by yourself, watching Parks and Rec, laughing really loudly. Um, to an outsider, I'm sure, or anybody who could just hear, they're probably like, "What the hell is happening in there?" Um, but I think that it probably is, there's a slight amount of relaxation mentally and physically, as well as that warmth being a good feeling. So feel, smiling as part of that, and just generally feeling better.
Yeah, smiling, happiness, feeling better, those are all good things. Uh, if there's anybody listening who has never gotten high, that is what you should take away from this. If nothing else, take that away that, maybe not 100% of the time, but that is a very typical response. So let's go back. So we talked about time. Let's talk about focus. You already sort of mentioned, like when you were watching the sunset, how you were a little bit more focused. It sounded like on some of these things. But can you go into a little bit more detail how your level of focus changes when you get high?
Yeah. So now that I actually hadn't considered this before, but my day job involves understanding a lot of the benefits of nature. And there is, in particular, a theory called attention restoration theory that talks about why being out in nature, watching a fire, watching a sunset helps your brain to relax because it's not being stimulated in a super focused way. You're certainly paying attention and observing and all of that, but you don't have to use your brain super strongly to have that experience, as opposed to working or hosting a podcast where your brain is, being taxed and
Hmm.
asked to work. And I feel like that's probably how it comes down to what I choose to do or not do when I'm high, which is interesting. I just hadn't considered it before. Like I want to be in those spaces where my brain is not heavily demanded of. Um, and I don't think it's just because that's where my brain is operating, but it's where I'm enjoying my mental focus being. That makes sense.
Mm. Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like yeah, you enjoy being sort of in that headspace anyway. Um, and so do you think that's why you? Yeah, I'm sort of trying to wrap my brain around it at the same time. Um, so how do you think that's relating to focus specifically? Um, uh, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, which is again, I don't tend to do anything that requires a heavy amount of focus. I'm
Hmm.
not going to try to do any work. I'm not going to try, to work really hard on something that demands all of my energy. But I think it's because of where I'm tapping into or what I want that experience to be, that it is more restorative. I guess all the stories that I've been telling thus far have been restorative stories, whether it's trauma or grief restoration, whether it's being out in nature, which I find to be heavily restorative,
Right.
or just watching TV and hanging out, and getting those bits of joy. Yeah, I think all of it's just really focused on the restoration, and so that's.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
you've done the work for the day. You've been productive. I sort of I think about this a lot just in my day to day life. I want to make sure that I'm productive at least a good chunk of the day, and then once you feel like that, then you can sort of turn your brain off and, whether it's watching TV or getting high or getting drunk or going into nature or whatever it is, I think we
Hmm.
all sort of need that time. And so then when you do those things, when you go into nature, when you watch Parks and Rec, one of the greatest shows ever, uh, how does your focus change in those specific situations?
I feel like I'm able to be completely absorbed and present. Um, Understanding that being in nature is very different than sitting in front of a screen in
Right.
terms of like presence. But I'm not thinking about all 20 things I need to do on my list next to me. I'm not thinking about it, just so many extraneous things. I'm focused on what I'm doing. And it's really interesting too that you even say, like just the uh, not working to a certain amount and then making sure that there's rest, because there's also a whole bunch of research behind that about you can't keep taxing your brain and actually you have a full tank in your brain the next
Hmm.
day. And so it's just, I don't know, whether you're using something else to facilitate that brain relaxation and that restoration, or going out in nature. Yeah, all of our brains need it to actually be as productive and especially as creative and critically thinking as we can be. That was a crazy aside. Sorry about that.
No, no, the asides are great. They're great. And so then, and I feel like I keep on asking the same question, but I trust me, you're giving me new stuff every time. Um, so when you are, say hiking, when you're in nature, are you looking at the nature, at the trees, at the sky, at the ground, whatever it is? Are you looking at that specifically in a different way, or is it more a general sense of just enjoying nature, probably even more than you normally would?
No, it is very visual in that case. So the whatever it is, as like the sunset of whatever is in front of me, just really feels that much more descriptive or that there's that much more to experience. If it's bark on a tree,
Yeah.
the nuances of the texture and the color, and even like how big the tree is, and most likely I'm touching it. It's so much. I think I keep using this word, but more sensory and
Mm-hmm.
sensual. All of that experience, and whether it's visual or physical, yeah, it's really putting a spin on what that experience is. With that, the just like being in nature and enjoying it, I actually had a conversation um, recently with a family member who was like, "Yeah, you should come up and take this vacation with us." But I have to tell you, we pretty much just sit on the porch, look over the water, and get stoned. And I was like, "Oh, nice." Like just like really like it's another like very sensory sensual experience of like this is what I want to look at, this is what I want to smell, this is what I want to I guess hear when I'm stoned. Like we go to this place to do that thing. It's like, oh, huh, it's pretty interesting insight to them.
Right, right. Something that sounds
Mhm.
like you maybe hadn't known, and yeah, that sounds like a pretty great weekend or long week or whatever it
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
And so it's like you said that you sort of look at like the bark or whatever it is. It feels like, why can't we do that normally? Why can't we have that state of mind all the time?
Mhm.
And luckily, there's this thing that allows us to focus in on that a bit more. I think that there are people probably like you who are probably more in tune with a lot of those things, especially when it comes to nature, more than the rest of us. But it does feel like it allows us to focus in on things that we weren't able to focus in on or wouldn't allow ourselves to focus in on.
Mhm.
There's no specific question to this. It's more of a comment of, you know, I guess this sort of gets into my question, which I usually ask at the end, which is, has it affected your sober life at all? Do you take the feelings of what it's like to be high into your sober life at all?
So that's interesting. I think we kind of danced around that a little bit in the restorative part of the
Mm,
experience for me, so that it might not be exactly the feeling or the experience, but it has allowed me to recharge in some way that I needed at that time, whether it was laughing or just being out in nature and experiencing that, or not feeling all of the other emotions that I had been feeling. It allowed me to be emerge better, I guess, or more prepared for whatever was next. Yeah.
and then so do you take the memory of what it's like to be in that state of mind? If you feel like you need that sort of restorative mindset, but you're not in a place necessarily that you can do that, do you ever consciously take those feelings and get yourself into that state of mind without doing one of the restoring
Yeah. Yeah.
activities and without being high?
Yeah. That's super interesting. So, uh, when I went to Minnesota earlier this summer and just really needed all the restoration, and we did smoke a little, we drank a little. And when I was writing in my journal afterwards, to try to capture the feelings of that experience, I definitely was capturing many of the moments when I was high and writing it down in memory so that I would have record of like all the details of it, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. So, um, and being able to then read those descriptions later does allow me to get that
Mm.
endorphin release, the relaxation. But it's really been, yeah, I would say more about when I write something about that experience and then can tap back into that feeling, probably more than trying to pull it up myself.
Sure. And then, so, obviously, this is very personal, but were there any specific things in the journal that you are okay with sharing? Any specifics from that?
So, yeah, sure. And I think that I wish I had it in front of me right now, my journal. It's not that far away in the house, but it's not in front of me. I There were many more of those moments where we were just mostly in nature. That was really my goal for that particular trip because it had been so long of me
Mm-hmm.
staying in the city and knowing that I really needed to get out and reconnect with wilderness. But so a lot of the experiences were sitting out on the little deck and watching the sunset, watching like all of the color fade from the sky, and like seeing what those nuances were. One was on the shore of Lake Superior, one was in the Boundary Waters, and they were really different experiences, but just felt like such a gift of also being able to slow down, spend the time to do that. That was the both of those. I think that those nights might have even been back to back. I had never done anything like that before, where I like just sat with somebody and watched with the color fade from the sky. And when you're actually doing that, you realize how long that takes,
Mm.
like how many like nuances there are, how many you're like, oh no, there's still actually color in the sky when your eyes are able to adjust to all of that. So it was really those kind of, again, super sensory, slow, detailed experiences that then I was going back and writing about.
Yeah. So we are going to end the very long part one of Jaime's interview there. Thank you very much for listening. So Jaime's organization, Perception Farms, they do have a website, which I will put in the show notes. It is just perceptionfarms.com. Very easy and simple, so thank you for that. They do have a couple of social media links in there, which I will also put in the show notes. I think right now they've got Instagram and Facebook. So yes, definitely go check them out as they're working on this, getting this new venture created. I can't wait to see what happens with that. And so, yeah, we're going to end things there. My email is whenimhighdoc@gmail.com. Please email me if you want to talk or possibly be interviewed. If you want to join my Patreon, you can get episodes early. I think we have one exclusive up there right now. There might be some more coming in the future. And you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I think that's at whenimhighdoc for at least a couple of those. And yeah, I just have to say thank you for listening. I say thank you so often, all the time I'm saying thank you. But I really do mean it. I really appreciate every single one of you who listens to this tiny little podcast. And with your help, we can grow this and more people can hear these wonderful stories from these people. At least I think they are. I don't know about you. I was recently talking to somebody on Instagram who just binged a whole bunch of episodes, and that was really great to hear. She was very appreciative of this podcast. You know who you are. Yeah, I think that's all I got to say. Rate and review on Apple Podcasts if you can. Anywhere else is great too. And subscribe and just tell your friends. And so thank you again for listening. And until next time, this is Spencer and some random person out in the world talking about what it's like to be high.